Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor. And it's Wednesday, which means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue, on his channel, will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week, the exciting comic book we are talking about is S.H.I.E.L.D., also known as Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. So, S.H.I.E.L.D. This comic book was created in the mid-60s in response to the spy craze. Apparently in the 60s there was a spy craze because James Bond was real popular, and then they made all these other television shows and things and books about spies. And the one I believe that led directly to this was a show called The Man from U.N.C.L.E., a television show that I've heard about all my life, and yet I have never seen a single episode of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Probably because it came out before I was born, and when I was growing up, they never reran it on any of the channels that I watched. So I've never seen Man from U.N.C.L.E. I probably never will see Man from U.N.C.L.E. considering how much television I watch nowadays. But it did lead directly to this because I guess that show was popular along with all that other spy stuff. So Stan Lee decided he wanted to cash in on that spy craze. Hence S.H.I.E.L.D. or Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. So Nick Fury we already knew in comic books because Nick Fury was Sergeant Fury back in World War II. Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, a comic book that somehow Steve Donoghue and I have not talked about yet. But don't worry, eventually we will get to Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. Even though this war comic book was about only 1/10 as good as this great war comic book from DC Comics, Sergeant Rock was one of the best war comics of all time. This, not so much. Although, it was kind of fun, for something that took place in the terrible Second World War. But it was a fun war comic. And it starred the macho American hero, Sergeant Fury. This guy was so tough and so macho, it was just ridiculous. That was pretty much Sergeant Fury's whole character. Tough and macho American hero. That's what he was. He wasn't any more complex than that, from what I remember reading these comic books. And I read quite a few Sergeant Fury comic books. When I was reading comic books, they were reprinting these, I believe, in some other comic book. One of the comic book reprint lines where they reprinted these old Sergeant Fury comic books. And yeah, that's what I remember about Sergeant Fury. He was the macho American hero. So during the 60s, they needed to have a super agent for their exciting spy comic book. So Sergeant Fury apparently survived the war, so let's bring him in as the macho American spy. He made a guest appearance in this Fantastic Four issue, so that makes it into this, the complete collection of S.H.I.E.L.D. by Lee and Kirby, where they fight the hate monger. An excellent issue of the Fantastic Four, but then we move into Strange Tales, issue 135, which formerly had the Human Torch in it, I believe. This was, no matter what you think of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., it was a huge step up from that Human Torch run, let me tell you. So, an improvement for Strange Tales. It did also have the fantastic Doctor Strange in Strange Tales as well. But this is the first issue where we get Nick Fury, who has an eye patch because some alien cat knocked out his eye. Or was that just... No way, maybe that didn't happen. Anyway, Nick Fury is now an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. This crazy looking dude up there is a member of Hydra. Hydra, the secret organization where they made everybody dress up in ridiculous, conspicuous outfits. So, yeah, you can always tell an agent of this super secret organization because they look like that. Whenever you have a super secret spy organization, make sure everyone wears super recognizable uniforms that look ridiculous. So anyway, we have Nick Fury here. We have a deal with life model decoys. Life model decoys are androids, by the way, who make their appearance in S.H.I.E.L.D. What does S.H.I.E.L.D. stand for? I hear you all asking. Well, back in the day, it stood for Supreme Headquarters International Espionage Law Enforcement Division. Aren't you glad you asked? They changed that a couple of times over the years, but somehow it always ended up spelling S.H.I.E.L.D. How about that? So we get a bunch of cool stuff in the S.H.I.E.L.D. comic books. Like here, right away, we get a super flying car. Let me just mention a couple of things about the S.H.I.E.L.D. comic books. First of all, our hero, Nick Fury, agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., the super tough, macho American hero. His character never changed. He was always Nick Fury, the super tough, macho American hero. In later years, his character did change a bit, but back in the day, not really. He was always that guy. The stories were crazy. These were crazy stories. I mean, Stan Lee just was like, you know, woo, let's just throw some crazy stuff in here that, I mean, if anything, the stories in S.H.I.E.L.D. were more outrageous and unbelievable than anything you'd find in like a Thor comic book. Thor comic books seem tame and realistic compared to S.H.I.E.L.D. at times, because S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed to be operating in a kind of in the real world, which made all of their shenanigans more ridiculous and outrageous. And the reason I say that is, even though it was obviously in the Marvel Universe, they never showed any superheroes in this comic book. For some reason, Nick Fury would show up in Captain America or whatever, but for a time anyway, you wouldn't get superheroes showing up. I don't know why, but you didn't. Not even Iron Man would show up. Tony Stark was part of S.H.I.E.L.D. and made all their weaponry and showed up in the first episode of S.H.I.E.L.D. The first issue that S.H.I.E.L.D. was in, but Iron Man didn't show up. So it was strictly about the spies and about the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. and they're combating the evil Hydra. The evil Hydra, which was, I mean, so this is Hydra at work here. You can easily recognize Hydra. I mean, they would, even when they kept their masks on all the time because they didn't even want to recognize each other. It was that super secret. So you had Hydra there. And of course, our hero, Nick Fury, spent most of his time in these early issues fighting Hydra. And the standout thing, there's two standout things for me about S.H.I.E.L.D. It was a lot of fun, I have to say. It was crazy. The plots, like I said, were just ridiculous. But it was terribly fun because what you have is basically a spy movie or a spy television show with an unlimited budget. Because comic books don't have any kind of production budget, you could put as much crazy off-the-wall stuff in a comic book as you can think of. And man, they did in this comic book for Nick Fury's adventures with S.H.I.E.L.D. And Jack Kirby just really cut loose on some of this stuff because Jack Kirby loved to create weird-looking technology in robots and machines and ships. And yeah, you can tell he just had a great time with this comic book. Eventually, I mean, look at this. I was looking for this. That is 100% Jack Kirby fun right there. So Jack Kirby really cut loose on this comic book. But Jack Kirby also had about 900 other things to do. So eventually he started just doing the breakdowns. Other artists would take over. And that's when Steranko took over the book. So let's move on to the next complete collection because we have to talk about Steranko, who took over this book. Steranko just started off as a guy who was inking Jack Kirby's breakdowns. But eventually, his art was so strange and so compelling that he took over this comic book. And later on, we'll get some of the artwork from Steranko, Jim Steranko, that has become legendary. Because even when I was younger, this run of comic books where Nick Fury and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were drawn by Steranko, this just became a legendary series of comic books that everybody talked about and everybody wrote about. And it was just artistically, at least, it was very successful. But was it as good as everybody seemed to think? Was it as innovative as everybody talks about? Here, Captain America finally makes an appearance in the Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. But our hero is still Nick Fury. Steranko was an interesting artist who did some interesting things. This is a very popular Steranko cover there. Now, you'll see some things about Jim Steranko's artwork. It was very imaginative. It was also very awkward, particularly when it comes to his anatomy. Oftentimes, when the heroes are running or jumping or doing their heroic things, they kind of look like they're about to fall over. Their anatomy is always a little strange. It was always a little odd and awkward. There were just awkward moments about the anatomy, but everything else seemed to make up for it. It was just a really interesting comic book. Now, there were moments that were questionable. Listen, this was written in the 1930s. Oh, wait, it wasn't. Never mind. Let's just turn the page here. There were awkward moments in this comic book that don't exactly hold up today, but a lot of this stuff was so strange and so weird that it was really groundbreaking for its time. And it must have seemed like something so bizarre with his use of photographs and collages and other stuff. I mean, look at that. That's just weird. And there's so much stuff like that in here. Got these crazy two-page spreads. The artwork was just off the wall and really, really interesting. And experimental. I don't know that the experiments always succeed, really, but it was always a beautiful thing to look at. And every issue you must have been looking forward to when this comic book came out, just to see what it was going to be and what it was going to look like. And it really did become a part of comic book history as far as the art was concerned. And it's something that I'm not sure anybody could really replicate this, but it certainly was influential. The art was really something. Of course, here you see the problem with reprinting this stuff in paperback. Where's this guy's head? Where's your head? His head has vanished into the gutter. That's an unfortunate thing. If you had the omnibus, and I think there was a S.H.I.E.L.D. omnibus, then you'd be able to see that poor fella's head. So Steranko was really, really interesting. And it's his S.H.I.E.L.D. It's his comic books when he took over the art and eventually the story, it's his stuff that people remember. It was just really cool. I happen to think that his paperback covers they're my favorite, like this one right there. This was a great paperback cover. And perhaps even better than that is this one. He did a magnificent series of shadow paperbacks. I mean, they were just outstanding. But it is this work, I think, by Steranko that I think this is why he's remembered. And he was great. I mean, he was so great. Just ask Steranko. Steranko would tell you just how great he was. As to whether it holds up now, I think it holds up really well. I think it's just beautiful and interesting and strange, despite the awkwardness of the characters and the strange anatomy and the odd defiance of gravity and the other weird things about it. I think it holds up fairly well. Because it's just so darn interesting to look at. That's a great cover. That's just crazy. Now, whether Steve Donoghue will feel the same, probably not. We don't always feel the same about this stuff. But I enjoy Steranko quite a bit, and I think it must have been just really something to see this stuff, because this is the kind of artwork you just didn't see in comic books at the time until Steranko decided to do it. He was following on the heels a little bit of Jack Kirby, actually quite a bit, really. Jack Kirby had experimented with some of the stuff that Steranko did before Steranko ever did anything in a comic book, or in a Marvel comic book anyway. But that doesn't take away, I think, from what Steranko did. I think this is a really interesting run of comic books. The stories are less memorable, except for the fact that they were always off the wall and crazy. It didn't seem to lose that in these initial runs that you'll find in these complete collections. The plots were always nuts. But a lot of fun. So yeah, I would recommend these books. They are comic book history. So there you go. Be sure to check out Steve Donoghue's channel and see what he thinks about these comics. And I will catch you next time.